Right, click the links to get the other video platforms. So why do people not trust the media? In this example, CNN, but really it's all of them. So you may have seen this clip where Don Lemon has got a expert on to discuss a hurricane situation, and Lemon tries to insert his own subjective beliefs about the history of hurricanes in the area, and the expert is telling him no. It's you're gonna have to look at objective data, not his subjective belief. And Lemon has a narrative to push about something about climate change, which over the past 100 years, people have been predicting global warming and global cooling for 100 years, and it's one of the most complicated areas of science ever. And it's unless you're an atmospheric physicist or you've got some extensive background in studying it, even when we were studying it in school, it was like, oh, it's a very complicated topic. It's going to require more study, and that it's like, no. We need to use it to manipulate it to somehow advance our interests. And you're like, yeah, but the studies aren't in yet. Well, scientists they know who pays the bill, and they know who gets tenure, and they know what universities get what programs, and you know what you have to say to get along, to go along. You know which way the wind is blowing wherever you are in academia, especially, or in industry. You know which way the wind is blowing. Um, and schools, colleges have gotten kind of weird. I don't know, maybe in the 80s because of the Bolshevik takeover, where some areas of study have just been abandoned because they're not politically correct anymore. Now, STEM held out a little bit longer than the softer sciences dealing with, I'll say, human anthropology type of things. Those kind of started disappearing in the 80s, and in the 90s it was just no longer politically correct. But the sciences held on a little bit longer, but even they had to kind of make way. But at least you got one guy who's standing up and saying, yeah, it's a more complicated issue than your subjective beliefs. So same network, they interview Bill Nye, who's kind of master's in engineering. I mean, well and good, that's fine, but that's not degrees, in geophysics, geology, geomorphology, glacial studies, atmospheric physics, computer modeling, the areas that would deal with the mathematical modeling and the geology and the history of the Earth over 4.5 billion, like climate change. Yeah, since the protoplanetary disk, almost 5 billion years ago. Yeah, the climate's been changing on planet Earth for quite a while. That's not what we mean. Now, here's the thing. Keep in mind, as I go through, he says a paragraph, but he doesn't actually say anything. He says three concrete things that seem. He talks about trains and power lines. The big drivers of this issue are going to be China and India. And nowhere does anyone on the left mention China or India. It's like people hate Trump, but the one of the good things he did was pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords, because it crippled the West, but China and India who are driving the gross pollution, and if there's any man-caused climatary issues, it's going to be coming from China and India, but it didn't hamstring them. It just hamstrung the West. So it didn't make any sense. A lot of things the West is doing don't make any sense because the West isn't run by the West. It's run by these Soros, Larry Finks, Rothschilds, banking cartels, Schwab types. It's run by these people who control the financial situation, and they also control the narrative via the media. So until people, it's like, so that's why things feel weird, because it's those names, like you saw what happened when Fox was doing an interview with Gingrich, and he brings up Soros, and the interviewer just panics. Like, why are you panicking? That's a public figure who, he has an Open Borders Foundation. It's his thing to flood the West with third world people. So he's a public figure, publicly doing all these things. Why would you shut down the interview because Gingrich, another public figure, is talking about Soros? That doesn't make any sense. That's still on YouTube. I think I clipped the video and put it up on Odyssey and Bit Chute. It's a trip to see a Fox News girl, both girls who are doing the interview, just panic. And it's like, as long as you have situations like that where those names, the Fink, Soros, Schwab's, Rothschilds, the WEF, and all these groups, they don't get the attention, you're going to have things be weird. And then it's like the climate side of it, you're going to have, if they don't mention China or India, well, there's no point in discussing pollution or climatology without discussing the main drivers of it, China and India. Oh, we're just going to focus on America and the West. That doesn't make any sense. So Bill Nye, he does this interview, and he's talking about conservatives with Jim Acosta, and his quote is, "When people ask me what we can do about climate change, there's all sorts of things we can do. We can address this. We have better building codes. We can bury our power lines. We can have better infrastructure, more resilient escape routes. We can have trains in place, but we can have these things ready. But if we don't acknowledge there's a problem, we're not going to get it done." So, okay, burying power lines, that decreases the chance of fires when wind takes them down. Fair enough. Building codes. Okay, these are like secondary or tertiary things. Nowhere do you mention China or India when dealing with global warming or global cooling or gross pollution or climatology. You mention nothing. So he says, and the way they frame this is if he doesn't say anything. I mean, you can read the article itself. He's just saying nonsense. The mechanical engineer who's not an expert on atmospheric physics or glacial studies or whatever. He's an engineer. He goes, "I just want to ask conservative lawmakers to cut it out. I understand that you want to get reelected. I understand that you have this primary system to get voters engaged. But look, you just got to cut it out." Again, you're not saying anything. And he points the finger at Tucker Carlson and Fox. Showed a graph tonight that was cherry picking the hurricane data, saying it had to make landfall, the Atlantic seaboard, it had to come ashore, had to have a strength. This data, it's not an out and out lie, but it's absolutely misleading. Okay, well, why wouldn't you get an atmospheric physicist, meteorologist, those guys who've got PhDs in physics to come give this discussion? Bill Nye's he's an engineer, fair enough, but he's a TV host. Like, why wouldn't you get an expert, someone who's got PhDs in the subject, someone who's doing research in this subject? It doesn't make sense that you get a TV host who's got some science background, but being a master's in engineering is nothing. I mean, that's fine, but it's not relevant to this. Why would you have him on? Because he said a couple of paragraphs, but he didn't actually say anything. I just ask everybody on the other side to cut it out, he shouted. We've got hundreds of, so he's, now he's emotional, but he's like, being emotional doesn't mean you're backing it up with facts and evidence. We've got thousands of people suffering. Come on, let's get to work. This is the U.S. Come on, let's be the world leaders, for crying out loud. But you didn't say anything. You gave 2 paragraphs worth of speaking, but you didn't mention China or India or what specifically you want to have done. You talked about trains and power lines, and that's CNN. So my point is, the reason CNN didn't have someone who is knowledgeable at the topic is because he didn't want to have the Don Lemon situation where the guy won't tell you what you want them to believe. And like, why Don Lemon, who's just an idiot, he's just a talking head on TV, why he would argue with someone who's an expert in his field? Because they have a narrative to push, and the narrative doesn't matter. The science doesn't matter, because the left doesn't own the science. The left aren't scientists. They can buy scientists and make them say what they want or threaten them, but they're not interested in the truth. If you're interested in the truth, you would have equally qualified scientists on both sides of an issue discuss things publicly. You don't see that in the mainstream media anymore, because they don't want the truth. They want to arrive at a conclusion. They present the conclusion and then they reinforce the conclusion, but nowhere will you see the argument. That's not what the mainstream media is about anymore. The mainstream media hasn't been the mainstream media in at least 20 years. That's why alt media is becoming so massively popular, and that's why they want to shut down alt media. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, check me out, subscribe, so I'll see you guys all next episode.